Hi there. I'm Lynn. Yeah, the bartender. My sister told me I wasn't elegant enough to be at her wedding. She erased me from the guest list, from the family group chat, even from our childhood home. What they didn't know? That house? It still had my name on the deed. They called me just a bartender, but why were they all so eager to move into the mansion I paid the taxes on? They pushed me out quietly, hoping I'd stay silent. But what happens when the one you underestimated finally says no? The champagne flutes clinked with hollow cheer, but something in the air had already turned. I stood near the corner of the banquet hall, trying to look like I belonged there, like I hadn't just been introduced to Logan's family as my sister Lynn. She's a bartender. That word hung heavier than the crystal chandelier above our heads. Bartender. Like it wasn't a real job. Like I wasn't the one who had helped Gypsy cover rent during her first year of law school, or bought her groceries when she blew her stipend on manicures and concert tickets. I knew that tone when Gypsy said it. Light, dismissive, her smile too polished. She used it the way people say, "She's harmless." And Logan's mom, Wanda, let her gaze slide over me the same way you'd glance at a stain on your white carpet, quick and impolite. I excused myself after 15 minutes. The fake smiles, the picture posing, the nervous jokes about seating charts, it was all background noise once the label, just a bartender, was out there. I didn't even get a hug when I left. Gypsy was too busy laughing with Wanda about the flower arrangements. I sat in my car for a good while, didn't even start the engine. Just stared at the dashboard and thought about how many times I'd picked Gypsy up when no one else did. I remembered the night she got dumped junior year and cried on my couch for hours. I held her hair back when she puked from too much wine at her graduation. I even drove her to her first job interview in heels she borrowed from me. But all of that vanished behind a single line. She's just a bartender. A few nights later, I was back at the bar I owned, cleaning glasses after closing. My bar was small, cozy, mostly regulars. No DJ, no gimmicks. Just whiskey, music, and familiarity. I'd built it from scratch. Took me 7 years to pay off the loan, but I did it. Without anyone's help. I was wiping down the counter when my phone lit up. A message from Gypsy. "Hey, sorry if things felt weird the other night. Wanda can be particular. I'm just trying to make a good impression." No apology, no ownership, just deflection, as always. It stung, but not in a surprising way. I was used to being the behind-the-scenes sister, the one who pays but doesn't pose, the one who gives but never gets credit. That night, I pulled out an old spiral notebook from the back office drawer. It had been collecting dust under receipts and menus. I started writing, not out of sadness, but clarity. I wrote down every time I'd covered for her, helped her, saved her, not to guilt her, not to use it against her, just to remember. Because something told me, if I didn't keep the facts straight, someone else was going to rewrite them for me. A week passed. The wedding planning was in full swing. I hadn't received any update about bridesmaid fittings or rehearsal dinners. When I texted Gypsy to ask about it, she replied, "We're still finalizing the list. It's been chaos." Right. The following Saturday, I drove over to drop off a box of things she'd left at my place months ago. When I got to her apartment, the door was cracked open. I heard voices, Wanda and Gypsy again. I mean, you don't want your big day cluttered by, people who don't exactly fit the vibe, Wanda said. Gypsy didn't respond, at least not loudly, but I didn't hear any protest. No, "Mom, stop," or "She's my sister," just silence. Complicit, cowardly silence. I didn't knock. I left the box at her doorstep and drove home. That night, I stayed up late going through old photos, birthdays, road trips, inside jokes. I paused on one, the two of us at a state fair, cotton candy in hand, laughing so hard we cried. That was before law school, before the Callahans, before vibes mattered more than people. I didn't cry, but something in me hardened, like a door quietly closing from the inside. The next morning, I got a call from one of our cousins, Krista. She sounded awkward. "Hey, just a heads up. Gypsy told Aunt Leah that you're not really coming to the wedding. She said you've been busy with, bar stuff." I clenched the phone. "Did she now?" "Yeah, I just wanted you to know. Thought maybe it wasn't true." I thanked her and hung up. I didn't feel rage. Not yet. Just something cold and steady forming underneath my ribs. Later that week, while I was placing a liquor order, another message popped in from Gypsy. Just confirmed the venue. It's going to be stunning. Wanda's covering most of it. I can't wait for you to see it. If you can make it. If I could make it. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about a wedding. This wasn't about tablecloths and champagne flutes. This was about rewriting roles, erasing history. She was positioning herself as the woman from the clean slate family, not the girl raised on discounted groceries and second-hand uniforms. And in that version of the story, there was no room for me. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my calendar, highlighted her wedding date, and wrote 2 words in red: stand by. I didn't know what I'd do yet, but I wasn't going to beg for a seat at a table I built for her in the first place. I didn't have a plan. Not yet. But the longer I stared at that red ink on my calendar, the more certain I became of one thing. I wasn't going to pretend like this was normal, like it didn't hurt, like being excluded from my own sister's wedding was just a simple misunderstanding. It was the following Thursday. I had just finished wiping down the tables at the bar, my body tired but my mind wound tight. The dinner rush had ended. A soft hum from the fridge compressor and the occasional honk from the street outside were all that filled the quiet. Then my phone rang. It was Gypsy. I stared at the screen a moment longer than usual before I answered. "Hey," I said, neutral. "Hey," she replied, drawing it out like this was a casual check-in, like nothing between us had shifted. "So, I wanted to talk to you about the wedding." My stomach tensed. "We've decided to keep it small," she said, like she was reading off a script. "Just immediate family and close friends." I stood there, still holding a towel, my hand frozen mid-wipe. Aren't I immediate family? There was a pause, so quick you'd miss it if you didn't know her. But I did. "Well, yes, of course," she said, but the tone was soft, guilty. "It's just, Wanda thinks it'll be more elegant if the guest list stays tight. You know, intimate." "Elegant?" I echoed. "Yeah, like, polished, less chaotic." "And I'm chaotic?" I asked, my voice sharper now. No, it's not about that. It's just, seating is tricky, and Logan's family, they're kind of particular." "Particular," I repeated, biting back the heat behind my eyes. "You mean particular about having someone like me in the photos?" Gypsy didn't deny it. "It's just one day, Lynn. One day that apparently defines our relationship." Her voice dropped into that fake sweet register I knew too well. "Don't make this about you." I laughed once, dry and sharp. "It was never about me, Gypsy. That's the damn point." She didn't say goodbye. Neither did I. I hung up, tossed the towel onto the bar, and stood there, staring at the empty room like it held the answers I was missing. Later that night, I called our mom. If anyone could see through this ridiculousness, it would be her. Or so I thought. She picked up on the second ring. "Mom," I began, skipping pleasantries, "did you know I'm not invited to the wedding?" There was a long pause on her end. Then came the sigh. "You know how your sister gets. She wants things a certain way. And this is her big day." "That's your response?" I asked, stunned. "You're seriously okay with your daughter being left out like she's some second cousin?" "I'm not okay with it," she said quickly, but her tone was already retreating. "But I understand it. She's under pressure, Lynn. Logan's parents have expectations." "And what about me?" My voice cracked, not from weakness but sheer disbelief. "Do I not get anything? After everything I've done for her?" "Lynn, don't start keeping score," Mom warned, that tired edge creeping in. "That's not what family does." I almost threw the phone across the room. "That's exactly what family does, apparently," I snapped. "Keeps score, just not in my favor." She didn't have a comeback. She never really did when the truth made things messy. "She's always been delicate, Lynn," she added weakly, "and you've always been the strong one." That wasn't a compliment. That was a justification for letting me get hurt again and again. I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. But inside, something was already breaking free. I started remembering how I gave up my college acceptance to help pay rent after Dad left. How I worked 2 jobs so Gypsy could take unpaid internships and still have gas in her car. How I sent her $300 when she got a parking boot in downtown Phoenix and begged me not to tell Mom. I remembered all the birthdays I planned, the surprise cake I baked the year she got dumped, the time I fought with her landlord when he tried to evict her after a missed rent. And now? Now I was not the vibe. The next day I opened Instagram to find a photo from one of her bridesmaids, a digital invitation mock-up with the caption, "It's official! Can't wait to celebrate this power couple." The guest list was visible in the screenshot. I zoomed in. There were people on there I hadn't spoken to since high school. Distant cousins, her college sorority sisters, a few coworkers I didn't even know she still talked to. But not me. I searched again. Nothing. I scrolled down to the comments. Wanda had replied to one. "Such a beautiful lineup. Can't wait to meet them all." That did it. This wasn't an oversight. This wasn't logistics. It was deliberate. I wasn't just uninvited. I was being rewritten out of the picture, erased like I'd never mattered at all. By the time Saturday rolled around, the air felt different. It wasn't just the dry Arizona heat settling into my skin. It was something sharper. A shift. Like all the years I'd spent swallowing disrespect were suddenly curdling inside me. I'd received 5 voicemails from Mom over the last 2 days. She didn't mention the wedding fallout directly, just her usual passive-aggressive tactics. "Call me when you're less dramatic," or "Don't let this silly thing come between sisters." That kind of denial had always been her brand, but this time I responded. I asked her to meet me at a cafe just outside Old Town, halfway between her condo and my bar. I chose it for the neutral ground: bright walls, friendly waitstaff, and coffee that tasted like someone cared while making it. She arrived 10 minutes late, wearing that look she always wore when she needed something, but didn't want to admit it. Tight smile, manicured guilt. "Hi, sweetie," she said, sitting across from me like nothing was broken. "You look tired." "Long week," I said, keeping it curt. After a few sips of iced tea and small talk about weather and traffic, she finally got to it. "So, Gypsy's really been stressed about the wedding." I said nothing. "She's just trying so hard to do everything right, you know? Planning a wedding is no joke these days." Still nothing. "That's why I wanted to run something by you," she continued, setting down her glass. "We were thinking, it might be a beautiful gesture, really generous, if we transferred the deed to Grandma's house. As a wedding gift." I blinked. "I'm sorry. What?" She leaned in like she was sharing something sacred. "You're not using all the rooms. It's a lot of space. And that property could really help Gypsy and Logan start strong. It's symbolic. A blessing from one generation to the next." My voice didn't rise, but my spine straightened. "That house was left to me," I said flatly. "Grandma's will is very clear." "I know, honey," she said, tone syrupy, "but you're not even married. No kids. And Gypsy? Gypsy isn't entitled to something just because she's getting a white dress and a hashtag," I snapped. Her smile cracked for a second. "Don't be ugly about this." "I'm not being ugly. I'm being factual," I said. "And let's be real, Mom. You didn't care about that house until Gypsy found out it was paid off." Her mouth opened, then closed. I stood up, left a 20 on the table, and said, "That house is not a gift. It's mine. And the fact that you even suggested it tells me everything I need to know." I didn't wait for her to follow me out. I drove straight to the house. The sun was brutal, casting sharp shadows along the stucco walls. As I turned into the driveway, I noticed a silver SUV parked just outside the gate. Strange. I stepped out of my car and heard voices from the backyard. Male, professional. Curious, I walked around the side of the house and nearly froze. Russell Callahan, Logan's father, was out back with a man in a polo shirt and khakis, holding blueprints. "The pool area has to go," Russell was saying. "We'll expand the patio here, maybe add a fire pit. Logan's wife deserves something timeless." I didn't move. They didn't even see me. They were planning renovations, on my house, like I was already gone, like I never existed. Russell clapped the guy on the back and said, "Let's get preliminary numbers by next week. I want this locked before the ceremony." Before the ceremony. I walked away before they noticed me. I couldn't trust my voice yet. That evening I called Krista. If anyone would shoot straight, it was her. "Hey," I said, pacing the kitchen with a beer in my hand. "You got a minute?" Please, she muttered. This family always gives me something to drink over. I laughed, but only a little. I need to ask you something. Were you ever officially invited to the wedding? She snorted. Not after the bridal brunch. Wanda said they were recalibrating the guest list. Translation: trimming the parts that didn't sparkle on Instagram. I leaned against the fridge. You too? Oh yeah, I heard Wanda tell Gypsy. Anyone who reminds them of where they came from should be left out. The words hit like cold water. This wasn't just a snub. It was erasure, carefully curated, deliberate. This isn't personal, Krista added. It's strategic. You're not just a bartender to them, Lynn. You're proof. Proof that their fairy tale is fake. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. That night, after I locked up the bar, I went home, opened my laptop, and logged into the county assessor's site. I pulled up the property deed. My name stared back at me in bold. Lynn Delaney, sole owner, no liens, no shared titles. I clicked through the PDFs, scanned the notarized documents, and smiled. They wanted a wedding gift? They'd get one they'd never forget. I closed the laptop slowly, like the weight of the screen held the weight of the decision I'd just made. I didn't slam it. I didn't pace. I just sat there in the dim light of my office, the hum of the ice machine in the back of the bar playing like white noise in my ears. Then the phone rang. The name on the screen made me pause. Dad. Dennis rarely called. He was the type of man who let Mom handle the messy stuff, emotions, disputes, apologies. His presence was always quieter, a passive force that preferred looking the other way than facing anything head-on. I let it ring once more, then answered. Hey. Hey, sweetheart, he said, like nothing had happened. You got a minute? I leaned back in my chair. Sure. He cleared his throat like it hurt. I just wanted to touch base. Gypsy, she's feeling overwhelmed. You know how she gets. She's also uninvited me to her wedding and tried to move into my house behind my back. A pause. Well, I don't know all the details, but your sister's under pressure. Wanda's got these expectations, and Logan's family is... they're old school. Old school doesn't mean cruel, I replied, voice even. I'm not saying she's right, he said quickly. I was thinking, maybe there's a middle ground. What if you let her use the house? Just for a bit. As a gesture. That was the moment the calm turned ice cold in my chest. No, I said simply. Silence. I'm not asking you to give it away, he added, gentle, measured. Just show her there's still room for forgiveness. No, I repeated. There's no room for lies, manipulation, or entitlement. Not anymore. He sighed, and it wasn't even frustrated. It was resigned. Like he'd known I'd say that, but he had to try for the sake of family performance. Okay, he said after a while. I just wanted to ask. I nodded, though he couldn't see it. Thanks for calling. We hung up, and I stared at the ceiling of my office for a long moment before grabbing my keys. That night, I walked through every room of the house. Grandma's house. My house. The one she left me not because I asked, but because I stayed when no one else did. And then came the memory. One I hadn't let myself sit with for a long time. It was right after Grandma passed. I'd just returned from the funeral home, still in a black dress, shoes dusty from the church parking lot. Dad had followed me into the kitchen while I made coffee. You know, he'd started carefully, a lot of families put homes like this in multiple names. That way it stays protected. Protected from who? I asked. He looked away. You just never know. I told him no. Not because I thought he'd steal it, but because I'd watched them all circle around Grandma in her final months like vultures disguised in good intentions. After that, dinners felt stiffer. Calls came less. I'd already started learning what it meant to be the one who said no. And here I was, doing it again. The next morning, as I restocked behind the bar before opening, Logan came in alone. He leaned on the counter like he had a casual question, but his eyes were scanning me like he was studying a test he hadn't prepared for. Morning, he said. Morning, I replied, not offering more. So, you still living at the Tonto house? I tilted my head. Yep, why? He shrugged, trying to act like he didn't already have a reason. I heard Gypsy say something about moving in early. Thought maybe you were... Transitioning out. I smiled, but not warmly. She must have gotten ahead of herself. Or maybe ahead of reality. He blinked. So, she's not… No, I said. She's not. He shifted on his feet. Right, cool. Just wanted to clear that up. When he left, I stood still for a moment. Then I walked into my tiny office, opened my inbox, and started typing. Subject, Property Clarification Body. This is formal notice that the property at 1208 Tonto Pass is not under consideration for transfer or occupancy. Please inform all involved parties accordingly. Any future communication on this matter should be directed through official legal channels. I reread it twice. Short, professional, no drama. Then I hit send. They wanted to act like I was invisible? Fine. But I'd learned something in the quiet. Silence is not the same as surrender. I wasn't raising my voice, but I was raising my wall. The following afternoon, I was wiping down the bar before we opened when the front door creaked open. We weren't supposed to unlock for another hour, but there he was. Logan. No gypsy, no entourage, just him, standing in his polo shirt like someone trying hard not to look shaken. Hey, he said, voice a little too casual. I didn't look up. We're closed for another hour. I know, he replied, stepping in anyway. I needed to ask you something. It's been bugging me. That got my attention. I set the towel down and leaned my elbows on the bar. Shoot, he hesitated, eyes darting to the floor before meeting mine. Were you the one paying for Gypsy's law school? I didn't flinch. Yes. All of it? Every semester, every book, every credit hour? He ran a hand over his mouth. She told me her parents paid. I raised an eyebrow. Did she also tell you they took out a second mortgage for her dorm furniture? His jaw clenched, a muscle twitching along his cheek. No, she didn't mention any of that. She wouldn't. Silence stretched between us like a rubber band pulled too tight. He finally let out a breath. Why would she lie about that? Because saying her sister paid makes the story messier, I said. Makes the fairy tale crack. He nodded slowly, then walked out without another word. That same night, several miles away at Gypsy and Logan's place, Wanda was sitting at the kitchen table, flipping through a stack of wedding vendor contracts when something caught her eye. A stray envelope had gotten tucked between catering invoices. She opened it absent-mindedly, expecting a bill. But it wasn't a bill. It was a payment schedule. Tuition, Arizona State Law, account, Gypsy Delaney. Payer, Lynn Delaney. Her brows furrowed. She flipped the page. 3 years' worth of transactions, regular, consistent, always from Lynn. Her fingers froze mid-turn. She reread it, slower this time, then sat back in her chair. The timeline didn't lie, and neither did bank records. By morning, it had already traveled like wildfire through the hidden channels families used to talk without ever admitting they were talking. I knew something had shifted when Marla, Gypsy's maid of honor, unfollowed me on Instagram. But the real signal came when Logan came back. Not to the bar this time, but to my apartment just after sunset. I opened the door, already guessing why he was there. She said you insisted, he started without greeting. That she didn't ask for help, that you wanted to feel needed. I crossed my arms. That's a story people tell when they don't want to admit how much they took. He looked tired. She let me believe you were bitter, dramatic, petty, said you were obsessed with looking like the hero. And yet, I said softly, she let me foot the bill. Quietly. For 3 years. He nodded, shame creeping into his voice. She never even told me your last name was on those loan forms. I didn't say, you should have asked. I didn't need to. The air between us said it for me. After he left, I returned to my desk. My hands moved before my brain even caught up. Subject: cease misuse of identity and property body. To Gypsy Delaney, Darlene Delaney. This message serves as a formal warning. Any continued reference to my name, address, business, or property for the purpose of social appearances, representation, or assumption will be considered intentional misrepresentation and may result in legal consequences. This includes, but is not limited to, claiming residency at 1208 Tonto Pass, referencing financial support not authorized for public disclosure, suggesting business affiliations with Ember Bar. I trust this will be the last time I need to address this matter informally. Sincerely, Lynn Callahan, owner and operator, Ember Bar. I reread it, adjusted nothing, then hit send. Let the fallout happen wherever it wanted. I'd spent too many years trying to soften the edges, hoping my silence would earn me peace. But silence had bought me a front row seat to my own erasure. Not anymore. If they wanted a war of whispers, I was ready to speak clearly. No rage, no tears, just the truth. And the truth, once out, has a way of cutting deeper than any scream. The masks were off now, and I wasn't the one left exposed. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even try. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table, fingers wrapped around a chipped mug of lukewarm coffee, scrolling through old emails, invoices, statements, anything that showed just how many lines they'd crossed. By morning, the soft hum of my laptop was the only sound in the apartment, the sunrise cutting a harsh orange line through the blinds. At 9 a.m. sharp, I walked into my lawyer's office. Deborah knew me well enough not to waste time on small talk. She took one look at my face and asked, "Ready to make it official?" I nodded. "No more informal warnings. I want to rescind all implied access, permanently." She raised an eyebrow, then motioned to her assistant. "Get the property revocation forms and draft a cease and desist." Within 20 minutes, we had 3 identical envelopes, each addressed and ready: Gypsy Delaney, Darlene Delaney, Wanda Harrison. Inside, the letter was crystal clear. No access, no occupation, no use of likeness, address, or implication of connection. Everything was covered, from the house to my name. I signed the bottom with a sense of finality I hadn't known I needed. The copies were sealed and sent. That should have been enough. But it wasn't. Because 2 days later, I got a call from my bank. "Hi, Miss Callahan. We're calling to confirm a private loan application under your name. It triggered a verification because of mismatched contact information." I felt my stomach drop. "What loan?" I asked, already dreading the answer. "A $25,000 personal line of credit, digitally signed 3 months ago. But it was never finalized. The system flagged it when someone tried to reapply last night." I asked for a copy. When it arrived, I opened the PDF and stared at the signature. It wasn't mine. It was close, my name, my cursive, but the C in Callahan was off, the angle wrong, a forgery, Gypsy. She hadn't just manipulated the narrative, she'd manipulated my identity. My hand shook as I forwarded the document to Deborah. She called within minutes, already furious. "This is bank fraud. We'll press charges if you want to move forward." I didn't respond right away. I just kept reading the fake form, the way someone stares at a betrayal that's too intricate to be spontaneous. This took time. This took planning. And while I processed that truth, the internet started to burn. It began with a screenshot, a post on Reddit from someone who went to high school with Gypsy. The caption, "So grateful to my parents for gifting us our dream house # wedding bliss." The house was mine. The photo was recent. People started asking questions. One user dug deeper, found public property records, and posted the deed, with my name highlighted. Then someone tagged the Ember Bar account. I didn't reply. I didn't argue. Instead, I reposted the deed on my own profile and typed one line beneath it: "No lies live long." The post went viral. People started DMing me, some curious, some cruel, a few sympathetic. But I didn't care about sympathy. I cared about facts. And the facts were finally speaking louder than Gypsy ever had. The following week, wedding invitations began landing in inboxes and mailboxes across Scottsdale. Each one carried a small white insert card. "Please note the wedding venue has changed due to unforeseen circumstances." Translation? They'd lost the house. They could no longer fake their way into it. That evening, as I was closing up the bar, my phone buzzed. Wanda. I debated ignoring it, then picked up. "This is cruel," she snapped. "What you're doing to Gypsy, it's spiteful, vindictive." I didn't yell. I didn't curse. Instead, I said calmly, "Cruel was pretending I didn't exist while cashing checks from my account." She paused, then hung up. Good, because for the first time in years, I wasn't just reacting. I was setting the pace. They built a fantasy on my silence, and now I was answering with facts. No rage, no scream, Just a line they couldn't step over anymore. They took my kindness for silence, so I answered with signatures instead of screams. The fallout didn't wait for a quiet hour. It crashed through the doors of my bar 10 minutes after the Friday rush began. I was behind the counter, pouring a rye on the rocks for a regular, when the door slammed open. I didn't have to turn around to know who it was. The tension in the room shifted. Conversation stalled. The clink of glasses froze midair. Gypsy's heels clicked across the floor like gunshots. "You ruined everything," she screamed. She was red-faced, mascara smudged and shaking with fury. Her voice sliced through the room, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. I set the drink down gently and walked out from behind the bar, wiping my hands on a towel. "You want to do this here?" I asked, my voice low but steady. "You embarrassed me online, got me kicked out of my own venue. Logan won't even look at me anymore." I didn't flinch. "You embarrassed yourself. I just stopped covering for you." Her mouth twisted. "You always had to be the martyr, didn't you?" "No," I said. "I was just the one paying the bills while you played make-believe." Her eyes darted to the crowd watching. "You're a bitter bartender. That's all you'll ever be." "And yet I own the house you tried to steal," I replied coolly. "Guess being just a bartender comes with perks." A few chuckles rippled through the room. She spun around and stormed out, but not before hurling one last dig. "You'll die alone, Lynn." I didn't respond. She wanted chaos, a breakdown, a scene. I gave her boundaries. Later that night, just as I was locking up, I saw a shadow at my gate. Darlene, waiting like a ghost from a past I no longer served. She wore a trench coat too heavy for the evening heat, arms crossed like she was holding herself together. "Can we talk?" she asked. I didn't move to open the gate. "You're already here." She stepped closer to the bars. "I just wanted the family to look good, for once." I tilted my head. "You mean you wanted the illusion of family to look good?" "Lynn," she whispered, "you turned Logan against her. You've destroyed her." "No," I said. "He saw the truth. I just stopped hiding it for you." She blinked, searching for another excuse, another lie, something to put the weight back on my shoulders. But I had nothing left to carry for her. "I never wanted it to come to this," she murmured. "And yet," I replied, "here we are." She left without another word. The next morning, Scottsdale's social media pages exploded. Photos from Wanda's last-minute bridal brunch were everywhere. A half-empty venue, a fake floral arch, a distant cousin mid-toast standing with a shaky champagne flute and saying, "You should be ashamed, Gypsy. All of you." The post went viral. Hashtags followed. #FakeBride, #BarSisterTruth, #ThanksLynn. I didn't share a word, didn't repost a thing. But my bar's Yelp page got 20 new 5-star reviews in 2 hours. By the time Sunday rolled around, Ember was packed. Not for the drinks, though those helped, but because people had started seeing the full picture. The woman they tried to write out was the one holding it all together. That evening, I sat on my porch with a glass of red and my laptop. Notifications pinged nonstop, but I ignored them. Instead, I opened a spreadsheet titled Expansion 2025, a new patio, extended hours, maybe even live music on weekends. Then, a text from Logan popped up. "If you need an investor, I'm in. No strings, just respect." I didn't respond immediately. I just stared at it, letting the quiet of my home wrap around me. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about rebuilding. Louder, stronger, clearer. They thought I'd break, but I just rebuilt. Louder. The cursor blinked beneath Logan's message, slow and steady like a soft pulse. I let it sit there for a while, untouched. No pressure, no expectations. Just a quiet moment of something I hadn't felt from him, or really anyone, in a long time. Respect. Not performative, not conditional. Just quiet, unforced, and real. 3 days before the wedding, everything around me felt like it was holding its breath. The sky, heavy with unspilled rain, hung low over the city. Inside, that same pressure mirrored itself in people's silences, in the way conversations faltered when I entered a room, in group chats that had once lit up my phone, but now sat in silence, unread and unfinished. The hush didn't bother me anymore. I had outgrown needing noise. That morning, instead of a text, Logan knocked on the back door of the bar. He knew better than to use the front. I opened it and stepped aside without a word. The familiarity of it struck me. How many times had we done this before? Not dramatic entrances, not grand declarations, just showing up. He looked worn, not broken, not confused, just tired, like someone who'd finally run out of the energy to keep carrying a lie. "I canceled the wedding," he said. His voice didn't shake. I didn't blink, didn't flinch. I just looked at him and waited. "She lied," he continued, "about everything, her job, the tuition debt, the house she said her aunt left her, even the savings she told me we had. Wanda tried to cover it up, said it would blow over, that if we had a beautiful wedding, everything else would fall into place." He exhaled like it had taken him a week to find the courage for that breath. "I thought you were bitter," he added. "I told myself that you were angry and couldn't let go of the past, but you were just honest. That's the part I didn't want to look at." I let his words land, not pushing them away but not clinging to them either. Then I nodded, once. "I loved who I thought she was," he said, voice low. "But you never pretended to be anyone but yourself. And you," I said, "finally stopped pretending you didn't know the difference." He didn't try to explain further. Didn't reach for my hand. Didn't stay longer than he needed to. Just said, "I'm sorry," and left. And that was enough. Later that day, my phone buzzed. "Darlene, Gypsy won't leave the bed, says she's lost everything." I typed out a reply. She threw everything away. Then I sat there staring at it. My thumb hovered over send, but instead, I hit delete. Some things didn't need to be said. Not anymore. I set the phone down face first on the counter, walked across the kitchen to the old wooden shelf beneath the window. There, framed in a cheap metal border, was a photo, me and Gypsy, kids in matching overalls, mud-streaked and wild from the creek behind Grandma's house. That day, we were untouchable. Before secrets, before betrayal. I took the frame down gently and placed it in a drawer. No ceremony, no sentiment, just a quiet decision. Some memories need time in the dark to stop hurting. Maybe one day they'd make sense. Or maybe they wouldn't. Either way, they didn't belong on display anymore. By early evening, Logan and I crossed paths again. Not in a bar, not in a bedroom, in my lawyer's office. This wasn't closure. It wasn't reconciliation. It was business. He sat across from me as we reviewed the paperwork. Expansion plans for the bar, new patio seating, acoustic Sundays, a kitchen remodel we'd been planning back when everything still felt like potential. He signed the agreement without hesitation and slid it across the table. "You believed in her," I said. "I don't blame you for that." He looked at me then, not with apology, but something closer to clarity. "I believe in you now. That matters more." There was no dramatic moment, no hug, no tension, just two people finally seeing each other without the fog of illusion. That night, I climbed up to the rooftop of Ember Bar. The sun was slipping low, painting the edges of the city gold. The breeze carried the first real chill of the season, the kind that signals the end of a long, exhausting summer. I leaned on the railing, glass of water in hand, and watched as the city lights flickered on one by one. Down on the streets, the world kept moving. No one knew what the day had meant to me, and that was okay. For years, I'd convinced myself that peace would come the moment I was welcomed back into the rooms I'd been pushed out of. That one day, they'd understand me, accept me, let me back in. But standing there, the city stretching out before me, I realized peace wasn't about being let back in. It was about not needing those rooms at all. Let them rewrite their stories. I wasn't in them anymore. I was writing my own. And no, I hadn't burned it all down. I'd just walked away and let the fire speak for itself. 2 weeks had passed since the wedding that wasn't. There were no phone calls, no backhanded texts, no cryptic family group chats lighting up with passive-aggressive quotes. Just silence, and it was the kindest thing they'd ever given me. The day Gypsy was supposed to become Mrs. Logan Callahan came and went like any other Saturday. I spent it restocking bottles, scribbling cocktail ideas in my notebook, and serving drinks to a packed house that didn't care about curated guest lists or Instagram-worthy vows. They cared about laughing, about the right pour, about being seen. No one asked about her. No one whispered around me like they used to. It was like the universe had quietly decided to match my energy. No more performing, no more pretending. The truth had done its job. And now, I had mine. Krista dropped by the next morning with fresh bagels and the kind of hug that doesn't ask for anything in return. "She's back with your mom," she said over coffee. "Haven't seen either of them at the store in days." I just nodded. No witty reply, no biting remark. Apparently, Russell had stepped back from all things Callahan. Wanda had turned her focus toward local charity events, still smiling, still networking, still pretending her legacy wasn't unraveling thread by thread. The house sat empty. Sometimes I drove by it on my way to the supplier. The yard was overgrown, the shutters half closed. It looked like a forgotten stage after the actors had gone home, and that suited me just fine. A week later, we hosted brunch on the new patio. Just a few tables, mismatched chairs, string lights from Etsy I'd strung up myself. Krista came again, this time with her partner and their twins. A couple of my cousins showed up too, the ones who had quietly distanced themselves from the drama, but never from me. Even Logan dropped by, not with flowers or apologies, but with a signed vendor contract and a fresh batch of coffee beans from a roaster downtown. We toasted with black coffee and scrambled eggs. It wasn't glamorous. It was better. Real. Simple. The kind of morning you don't post about but remember anyway. "You okay?" Krista asked me once the tables were cleared and the laughter died down. "I'm good," I said, and meant it. She smiled. "You look it." That night, after everyone had left and the patio lights were turned off, I went upstairs to my apartment. There was a box in my closet I hadn't touched in years. It held old photos, drawings, notes passed between us in middle school, a charm bracelet we both wore until Gypsy traded hers for something more adult. I didn't open each item. I didn't cry. I just placed one more thing in it. The wedding invitation, the one that never had my name on it. Then I closed the lid, slid it to the top shelf, and left it there. I didn't do it out of anger. I did it to remember. Because forgetting isn't healing, it's erasing. And I wasn't erasing anything anymore. Not myself. Not the past. Just placing it where it belongs. Behind me. I didn't need revenge. I just needed to remember who I was. And this time, I'm not forgetting. Sometimes, standing up for yourself doesn't look like a fight. It looks like silence, boundaries, walking away, without needing anyone to chase you. I used to think family meant unconditional love, that no matter how much I was overlooked, if I just kept showing up, kept giving, kept sacrificing, maybe one day they'd see me. But here's what I've learned. You don't have to burn yourself down to keep someone else's version of family warm. You are allowed to be the one who says enough. You are allowed to protect what you've built, even if it means letting go of people you thought would always be there. And to anyone watching this who's ever been erased, used, or made to feel small, you are not invisible. You are not overreacting. You are not just a bartender or just anything. You are the author of your own story. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is simply to stop apologizing for writing it your way. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever walked away from a relationship or a situation that no longer saw your worth? Do you believe cutting ties can be an act of love for yourself? Let's open up in the comments, share your story, your thoughts, or even just where you're watching from. If this video spoke to you, type 1 in the comments to let me know it reached you. If it didn't, I want to hear that too. Tell me why. It helps us grow. And if you're comfortable, drop your city or state. I'd love to see where you're tuning in from. And hey, if this kind of story resonates with you, if you believe in truth, family, and healing, don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more real, raw stories that hit home. Thanks for watching. Hi, I'm Avis. You ever walk into a room and know, not just feel, know, you were never supposed to be invited? The day my father's will was read, my mother looked me dead in the eye and said, "Don't expect a penny." And then the lawyer reached for a second envelope. They'd erased me from the family on paper, just like they had in real life. But what they didn't expect was that my father had left behind more than money. What happens when the quiet daughter refuses to disappear? I got there early. Too early. The elevator was slow, humming like it had better things to do. I stood in front of the frosted glass doors of Atwood and Jameson Law, staring at the etched lettering, like it might spell out something different if I blinked twice. But it didn't. The truth never does. The receptionist looked up, startled. "You're Miss Delora?" I nodded. "I have a 9 a.m. appointment, reading of Howard Elric's will." She motioned toward the hallway without smiling. "They're already inside." Of course they were. I walked down the corridor, the sound of my flats tapping against the floor, the only proof I belonged in that hallway. The conference room door was open. Inside, my mother and sister sat like they owned the oxygen in the room. Verlette wore navy, pearls, and a look of complete dismissal. Marla had that effortless suburban polish, lip gloss, silk blouse, and self-importance. They didn't stand. They didn't greet me. Instead, Verlette leaned back slightly in her chair, tilted her chin, and said, "Don't expect a penny, Avis. You're here for closure, not a check." It wasn't the words, it was the tone, the confidence of someone who believes the story has already ended. Clive Atwood stood by the window, stiff and neutral. He offered a polite nod, then gestured for me to sit. I pulled out the chair furthest from my mother, not because I was afraid, but because some things, like distance, are better preserved. Verlette reached into her leather folder and slid a set of papers across the table. "This is the will, signed, notarized, no surprises." She sounded proud, like presenting a math test she already knew she aced. Clive accepted it, adjusted his glasses, and began to read. Howard Elric, my father, had left everything to Marla. The house, the savings, even the old Buick that hadn't run since 2007. My name wasn't on a single line, not even in a footnote. Marla leaned forward slightly and offered a look that tried to mimic concern. "Avis, I'm sure it's what Dad thought was best. You know how he felt about structure and your lifestyle." I didn't flinch, didn't blink. I just looked at her and thought, you always did enjoy front row seats to someone else's undoing. I turned my eyes to the paper. Neat margins, legal language, a death sentence to presence. It wasn't just about the money, not really. It was about being deliberately left out of something I helped carry. I wasn't asking to be named first. I just didn't expect to be erased completely. Marla sipped her coffee like she was waiting for applause. Verlette crossed her arms and turned her attention to her phone. I reached into my canvas bag and pulled out my small black notebook. I didn't say anything, just opened to a fresh page and wrote a date. Then one word. Nothing. Clive's eyes caught the motion. His brow lifted, just enough for me to notice, and then he cleared his throat. "Miss Delora," he began, his voice firm but measured. "Before we proceed, I have a responsibility to ask if there is any objection." I met his eyes. "There is," Verlette scoffed. "Here we go." I didn't look at her. I looked at Clive. "That's not the only will, is it?" Clive's response came with a pause that was too long to be casual. His fingers moved toward the briefcase like they were remembering what he'd promised someone long ago. But before I could press, before anything new could unfold, the meeting wrapped up with a vague, "We'll reconvene soon." Verlette acted like it was a full victory. Marla, all smug grace, gathered her designer purse as if she'd just closed escrow on a mansion she'd inherited for being obedient. I left without another word. Outside, the air was thick. Georgia in spring never lets you forget where you are. I walked slowly to my car, not because I was tired, but because my body needed to catch up with my mind. And once I got in, once the door closed, and the world muted behind me, the silence hit harder than anything Clive could have said. I drove home on autopilot, turning the radio on just to have someone else's voice in the car. By the time I walked into my apartment, the daylight had faded into that strange blue-gray that doesn't quite feel like night yet. I dropped my bag by the door, kicked off my shoes, and stood in front of the gallery wall I never finished. 5 black frames. All empty. They weren't decorative. They were placeholders. Reminders of what never made it onto the wall. No family pictures. No vacation snapshots. No, look how far we've come moments. Just hollow rectangles collecting dust. I crossed the room, opened the cabinet beneath the TV, and pulled out the old shoebox I hadn't touched in years. It was labeled in my own handwriting, kept. Inside were things that didn't belong anywhere else. A clay magnet I made in 2nd grade, a hospital bracelet from when I broke my wrist climbing the magnolia in our front yard, and a stack of birthday cards I wrote to my father over the years. None of them ever sent. I held one from when I was 19. On the back, I'd scribbled, "I'm still here, Dad." It wasn't a question. It wasn't a plea. Just a fact. Unspoken. Unacknowledged. It took me years to realize. I wasn't overlooked. I was never even considered. I sat on the couch, the box beside me, and let my eyes fall shut. The living room held a quiet that was familiar, but not friendly. And then the memories came, uninvited, but persistent. 15 years ago, Thanksgiving dinner. The family had gathered around the big table. Turkey, stuffing, cranberry sauce that nobody touched. My uncle had brought his camera for the family photo. Verlette instructed everyone on where to stand. When it was time to take the shot, she looked at me and said, "Can you grab more chairs from the garage?" I remember hesitating. I remember thinking, this won't take long. But by the time I came back with the chairs, the camera had clicked, the photo taken, and the moment sealed. That framed picture hung in the hallway for years. I saw it every time I visited. 11 smiling faces, and not one of them was mine. I used to tell myself it didn't matter, that I didn't even like how I looked that year, that maybe I'd been blurry anyway. But you only lie to yourself when it's safer than the truth. And the truth? They never even noticed I wasn't in the frame. When you're excluded long enough, you stop looking for your seat at the table. You stand behind it, you serve it, and then you leave before dessert. A sharp knock pulled me back to the present. No one at the door, just the neighbor's kid slamming theirs shut again. I got up anyway, needing movement, and wandered into the kitchen. I poured myself a glass of water, but didn't drink it. Instead, I found myself drifting toward the window. Across the street, porch lights flicked on one by one. People inside laughed, clinked glasses, started dinner. Families doing regular things. Together. I turned away and picked up my phone. I scrolled aimlessly, not really reading, and then I paused on a photo. A picture from last month, posted by my sister. There she was, smiling at a brunch table, arms around Verlette. The caption read, "Grateful for the woman who taught me everything." Funny. She never taught me anything except how it feels to be used and dismissed. I remembered a different day, just a week ago. I'd stopped by Verlette's house to drop off some papers for Clive. She was on the porch, sipping iced tea with her neighbor. They didn't see me right away. The neighbor asked, "And your other daughter? She's still around?" Verlette didn't miss a beat. "Avis? Oh, she's still playing artist. You know how creative types are. Emotional, impractical. Never got a real job like Marla." That word stuck with me, still, like failure was a phase I refused to grow out of. I didn't interrupt. I just walked back to my car, closed the door, and let the words settle. Now, sitting in my apartment, I opened the drawer where I kept my brushes. I pulled out a canvas I hadn't touched in months. Not because I didn't know what to paint, but because I didn't know if it would matter. Tonight, it did. I stood the canvas on its easel, stared at it, and then I began to paint. Nothing elaborate, just something of mine. A soft field, an open sky, and when it dried, I framed it. Not for them, not for show, for me. The canvas stood drying on the easel when my phone buzzed the next morning. It was Clive, short and direct as always. "Come in," he said. "There's something that needs to be addressed before it's buried." I got dressed without much thought. threw on the same neutral blouse I wore to the first meeting, and headed out. The air was still damp from last night's rain, and the sidewalk glistened like it had secrets. By the time I reached the law office, the receptionist barely glanced up, just pointed toward the conference room. They were already there. Of course they were. Verlette in her powder blue suit, sitting upright like this was a campaign stop. Marla beside her, arms folded, lips pursed. I walked in without flinching, even as their eyes pinned me like I was the problem that refused to go away. Clive stood near the window, holding an envelope that looked different from the last one. Older, more personal. I could see the edge of handwriting on it, my father's. I didn't sit right away. I waited. He cleared his throat. This was delivered to me privately, 2 weeks before Mr. Elric's passing, Clive began. Sealed, witnessed, dated. Verlette didn't move. Marla shifted slightly, as if something in her tightened. Clive laid the envelope on the table. This is the updated will. For a few seconds, no one said anything. Then Verlette leaned forward. Howard didn't. He wasn't in any state to be. Clive didn't let her finish. He was evaluated for legal competence the day before this was signed. Documentation is included. He opened the envelope carefully, like it might dissolve if handled wrong. As he read, I focused on a scratch on the table, something small and harmless to anchor me. All assets, he said, including the residence on Cottonwood Avenue, savings held at First Southern, the boat slip at Lanier Creek, and the remaining 38% stake in Elric Hardware, are to be passed solely to Avis Delora. My name. He said my name. Marla made a choking sound, quickly masked by a cough. Verlette didn't look at me, but I saw her hand twitch, barely perceptible, curling against the edge of the table. Clive finished reading and placed the papers back into the envelope. Then he looked up. It is legally binding, fully enforceable. I didn't smile, didn't gloat. I didn't feel victorious, just visible. Marla finally spoke. This is absurd. What's she going to do with any of that? She doesn't have kids. She's barely employed. Verlette added, Howard would never leave the business to someone who didn't even understand how it ran. I let them spiral. Clive waited for me to respond. I didn't ask for this, I said, keeping my voice steady. But he chose clarity in the end. Silence followed. Not awkward, not stunned, just quiet. The kind that settles after something finally lands where it's meant to be. Clive then reached into his briefcase again, this time pulling out a USB stick. There's one more thing, he said. He plugged it into the flat screen on the wall, turned the volume up slightly, and stepped back. My father appeared on the screen, older than I remembered, wearing the robe he used to fall asleep in when he watched late-night baseball. His voice was hoarse but strong. If you're watching this, he said, then I didn't get the chance to say it in person. That's my fault, like most things. He paused. The silence between his words said more than some people say in a lifetime. Avis, I made a lot of mistakes, but none bigger than letting you feel invisible. You weren't. I saw everything. I just didn't say it. He looked down, gathered himself, and continued. Your sister was always louder. Your mother, stronger. I assumed you didn't need me. But that wasn't true, was it? My chest tightened. I changed the will because it was the only way left to acknowledge you. Not because I wanted revenge on anyone else. Because I wanted you to have something with your name on it. He leaned back slowly in his chair. Forgiveness isn't something I can ask for. Not now. But if you ever find it in you, I hope this helps start that path. The video ended. The room didn't move. Verlette's eyes were fixed on the blank screen. Marla had gone pale. Clive turned off the monitor and stepped back to the table. This recording is time-stamped and stored on 2 independent drives, one submitted to the county clerk's office. It's real. It's protected. No one spoke. Finally, I stood, adjusted my sleeves, looked at the 2 women who had spent a lifetime telling me I didn't count. "You edited me out of everything," I said, voice calm. "But you forgot. I remember." Their silence didn't last. It never does. Verlette's voice cracked the air like glass underfoot. "He wasn't in his right mind. You pushed him to this, Avis." The way she said my name, as if it was dirt on her tongue, did something strange to the room. Everything shifted. Clive looked up from the paperwork. Marla snapped her head toward me. And suddenly, the performance began. "She was alone with him every day," Marla added quickly. "You don't know what she said to him behind closed doors. Dad was vulnerable. He trusted her, and she took advantage of that." Clive held up a hand, calm but firm. "Let's clarify something. Mr. Elric's attending physician signed a formal statement of mental capacity on the same day the updated will was executed. This wasn't some coerced document scribbled on a napkin. It was reviewed, witnessed, and legally filed. You're welcome to challenge it, but I assure you, it won't hold up." Marla's lips tightened. "Oh, please." Of course, the doctor signed off, probably under pressure. People do favors all the time in this town, especially when money's involved. Verlette nodded in agreement. Howard was declining. He didn't even recognize his own grandchildren anymore, but suddenly he's coherent enough to disinherit his entire family? That word, family! They wielded it like a weapon, forgetting that it cuts both ways. I stayed seated. Still. But my hands rested on the arms of the chair like I was ready to stand if needed. I didn't flinch when they hurled their insults. I just waited. Then I spoke, calm and even. "Is that the part where you wanted to put him in a home? Because he couldn't remember your kids?" That stopped them. Marla's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Flashback. 1 year earlier, a late dinner at her house. The kids were screaming. Verlette was microwaving lasagna, and Howard was quiet, staring at a plant in the corner like he'd never seen one before. Marla had said between bites, "Honestly, it's getting exhausting. He doesn't even know who we are half the time. We should be looking into full-time care." I'd looked across the table at him. His eyes met mine. They were foggy, unsure. But I was there. He saw that. He knew. "I'm not ready to be left somewhere," he'd whispered, barely audible. Nobody responded. Back in the conference room, I reminded them. "You were ready to let him go before he was ready to leave. You said it, at that dinner. You called it a burden." Marla's jaw clenched. "That's not fair. You don't have kids. You wouldn't understand how hard it is trying to juggle everything while also dealing with—" "Your father?" I cut in. "You mean dealing with your father?" Verlette leaned in now, voice low, deliberate. "Don't twist this, Avis. You isolated him. You made him feel like we'd abandoned him." "No," I said. "You did that yourselves. I just happened to be there when he noticed." Clive shifted in his seat, pulled out a final set of documents, and slid them across the table. "We're done here for today. Avis, as per the updated will, your authority as executor is effective immediately." He handed me the folder. Verlette stared at it like it might explode. I stood slowly, took the papers with steady hands, and looked at both of them. Not with rage, not even pity, just certainty. "If you plan to come for me again," I said, voice low but clear, "bring something stronger than denial." I turned toward the door. Behind me, Marla muttered under her breath, "This isn't over." She wasn't wrong. I stepped into the hallway, and Clive followed after a few seconds. We didn't talk as we walked to the elevator. He pushed the button, hands clasped in front of him. "They're not used to losing," he finally said. "They're not used to being challenged," I replied. He nodded. "Brace yourself. They'll try again, but this time it won't be in person." He was right. What came next wasn't a confrontation. It was a strategy. Not words, but documents. Not voices, but signatures. Poison wrapped in paperwork. Clive didn't say anything as he locked the conference room door behind us. Just a nod toward the hallway and a quiet, "Follow me." We crossed through a side corridor I'd never noticed before, smaller, windowless, probably designed for meetings when things got ugly or uncomfortable. Fitting. He opened the door at the end and stepped aside, letting me in first. The room was cool, lined with wood shelves and a single table, already set with a thick folder. I sat down, more out of habit than fatigue. My body was awake, but my mind hadn't caught up yet. All I could hear was Marla's voice echoing from earlier. She doesn't even have a real job. Clive took the seat across from me and slid the folder forward. You'll want to keep these close, he said. They were meant for you, specifically. Everything your father didn't trust them with. I opened it. Inside were stapled packets and sealed envelopes. Neat, careful, organized in a way my father never was, at least not with me. I recognized my own handwriting on some of the receipts. Emergency room invoices, pharmacy pickups, monthly statements from the care center he refused to live in. They were all there. The things I'd paid for without expecting payback. The charges I never mentioned at family dinners because I knew how that conversation would go. You volunteered, Avis. No one forced you. At the back of the folder was a sheet labeled Designation of Sole Medical Advocate, dated and signed 2 months before he died. Clive spoke softly. He didn't want anyone else involved in his care, Avis. He was very specific. I nodded, fingers still on the page. They'll say I isolated him. They already have, he replied. But this shows something different. This shows responsibility. I took a breath and leaned back. The silence between us felt less like tension now, and more like clarity. They always said I was the impulsive one, I murmured. Messy, soft, too emotional to handle anything serious. Clive folded his hands. And yet, you're the only one who kept everything. His words settled into me like bricks finding the floor. He reached into his briefcase once more, pulling out a leather-bound journal. Older, worn at the corners. I recognized it immediately. My father's. I hadn't seen it since I was a teenager. He left this for you, Clive said. Told me not to show it unless things got complicated. I took it gently, the leather warm in my hands. I opened it. The pages were uneven, messy, his handwriting slanted, sometimes almost unreadable. But there it was, page after page. Thoughts, observations. Some dated, some not. None of it edited. One entry stopped me cold. The ink had bled slightly from the way he'd pressed too hard. I told Marla she was brilliant because she needed it. I ignored Avis because I thought she didn't. I thought she was fine. Quiet meant fine. Turns out it meant she learned to disappear. Another entry, dated just a few weeks before he died. Avis has been here every day. I watch her unpack groceries like she's building something. She doesn't talk much, but I don't need her to explain anything. I see it now. She was never asking for recognition, just to be seen. I closed the journal and set it down. Not out of anger, not sadness either. Just wait. Recognition is heavier when it comes too late. Clive didn't press me to say anything more. He just sat, letting the moment settle. I gathered the folder and the journal, holding them to my chest as we stood. By the time I got home, the sun had dipped below the trees, and the streetlights were buzzing with that faint hum that only seems to exist in quiet neighborhoods. I placed the papers on the kitchen table, took a long sip of water, and stood in front of my blank canvas. It had hung there for months, more protest than art. I hadn't touched it because I wasn't sure what needed to go on it. But now, it wasn't about what others might see in it. I pulled out my brushes, found the box I'd labeled in Sharpie years ago. Proof I never needed, but always kept. I opened it and slid the receipts inside, followed by the journal. Then I closed the lid and placed it on the shelf above the desk. Then, with slow, steady strokes, I painted over the canvas. Not to cover up what had never been created, but to begin something that finally was. I was rinsing brushes in the kitchen sink when the knock came. 3 firm raps, not aggressive, but official. I dried my hands, walked to the door, and opened it to find a courier holding a large envelope. "Are you Avis Delora?" I nodded. "Signature, please." He handed me a tablet, barely made eye contact. I signed, took the envelope, and closed the door. Back at the table, I slid it open. The top sheet bore the seal of Chatham County Probate Court. Petition for conservatorship of financial affairs, it read. Filed by Verlette Mira and Marla Genevieve. My pulse slowed. Not sped up, slowed. The kind of stillness your body reaches when it knows it's about to be tested. I flipped through the rest. Pages of accusations, emotional instability, social isolation, signs of unresolved trauma, concerning behaviors following the death of Howard Elric. Clive picked up on the second ring. "They filed this morning," he said. "They're moving fast. Hearings in 6 days." "Are they serious?" "They're not bluffing. They want your signature, your bank access, your say in everything. They want the power they think I don't deserve." He was quiet for a beat. "They're not just coming after your inheritance, Avis. They're coming after your autonomy." The hearing was held in a side courtroom tucked into the back of the courthouse, smaller than the one for the will dispute. Fewer people, more tension. Verlette wore her usual polished armor, cream blazer, minimal jewelry, fake concern. Marla played the attentive daughter, head tilted, brows furrowed like she was carrying the weight of my decline on her own shoulders. Clive sat beside me, calm as ever. My hands rested on the table, empty. I didn't need to bring anything. I was the evidence. The judge, a woman named Ramona Skeldon, had a face carved by a career in law. She looked like someone who'd seen plenty of families tear each other apart and had stopped being surprised. Marla spoke first. "We're here because we love Avis," she began. "We're not trying to hurt her. We're trying to help. She's alone. She's grieving. She talks to herself, sometimes out loud in public. Her art has taken a darker turn. I worry. We worry." Verlette added, "She hasn't held steady employment in years. She's erratic, emotional, not in a dangerous way, just not in a stable one." Clive remained still. The judge turned to me. "Miss Delora, would you like to respond before we move to evidence?" I looked at Marla, then at my mother. "I'm sure this isn't about my art style, or my voice in public. It's about control and money." "Objection." Marla's attorney tried to jump in. Judge Skeldon raised a hand. "She's allowed to speak." Clive slid a folder across the table. "Exhibits A through C, Your Honor," he said. "Bank statements, medical receipts, and a psychological evaluation from a licensed therapist. Miss Delora has no diagnosis that would disqualify her from managing her own affairs." Still, the judge asked me, "Have you experienced any mental trauma that you believe affects your current capacity?" I didn't hesitate. "I was 9, I said. Had a fever over 100. My teacher called home. No one answered. I stayed at school until the janitor found me crying in the break room. He called someone, can't even remember who. Eventually, a substitute teacher drove me home. I didn't eat dinner that night. I just sat in my room and realized, if I got sick again, I needed to keep it to myself." No one spoke. "That moment didn't break me," I continued, "but it shaped me. I learned how to function without being checked on." Verlette shifted in her seat. For once, no quip, no retort. I turned to face her and Marla fully. "You don't think I'm capable of managing money?" I asked, quieter now. I was capable enough to track every bill, every appointment, every medicine Dad needed. I buried him without help from either of you. I organized everything while you were busy drafting smear campaigns. Gasps echoed behind us. A few people shifted in the gallery. Judge Skeldon took off her glasses. Her eyes landed on Verlette first. "I've seen real instability," she said. "Emotional volatility, poor decision-making, paranoia. That's not what I see in Miss Delora. What I see is grief, processed quietly, but with clarity. She is not unfit, she's just alone." She signed the ruling. Petition denied. Outside the courtroom, I didn't speak to anyone. Not Clive. Not the reporters by the steps. I walked straight to my car. I sat behind the wheel and took one slow breath. They had tried to strip me of my name, my rights, and now, my mind. But I was still here, still me. 3 days passed without a word. No calls, no emails, no drama, just quiet. But in families like mine, silence was never surrender. It was a smokescreen. I was at Clive's office that Friday morning when his assistant knocked lightly and peeked in. "There's a call from the probate office, said it's urgent." Clive excused himself. I stayed seated, sipping lukewarm coffee from a paper cup that had already started to bleed around the rim. I stared out the window as the azaleas bloomed along the courthouse lawn across the street. When he returned, his face said everything. "They flagged a document." He dropped into his chair, hands steepled. "During the conservatorship hearing, your mother and sister listed themselves as active fiduciary custodians over your father's estate. Problem is, there's no court record supporting that." I raised an eyebrow. "Meaning?" "Meaning they filed fraudulent documents, likely assumed no one would ever double-check." I leaned forward. "How bad is it?" Clive opened a file on his laptop and swiveled it toward me. "They submitted this 2 weeks before your father passed. Backdated, unsigned by him, yet stamped by a clerk during a weekend rotation. It was slipped into the records like it belonged." My jaw tightened. "They tried to legally take over his assets before he even died." "They acted like the estate was theirs," Clive confirmed. "But your father never authorized any of it. It's illegal, plain and simple." I folded my arms across my chest. "So what's next?" He paused, then opened a drawer in his desk. From it, he pulled a sealed envelope, thicker than anything I'd seen so far. The seal was already broken, the paper yellowed slightly around the edges. "Your father left this with me the same day he revised his will. Told me to deliver it only if you were challenged unfairly." He handed it to me. I opened it slowly. Inside was a lawsuit, fully prepared, fully notarized, addressed to Verlet Mira and Marla Genevieve, filed on the grounds of financial misconduct, attempted fraudulent custodianship, and falsification of public documents. I flipped through the pages until I saw it. Dahlia Reeves' name, a signed affidavit. She had detailed the months leading up to his death, how I'd handled all his care, that no one else had shown up, that Verlet and Marla came only for photographs and convenient appearances. Clive's voice brought me back. "The documents are airtight. It's not a matter of if we win. It's whether you want to press forward." I stared at the folder in my lap. "What happens if we settle?" "They avoid court, keep their reputations intact, probably spin it into some kind of misunderstanding." I sat with the thought for a moment. Then I shook my head. "No," I said. "Let them stand in front of a judge and say it out loud. Let them explain under oath how they tried to erase me." Again. Clive nodded slowly. "We'll file this morning." It didn't take long. By the time I left the office, the summons were already being delivered. I imagined Marla receiving hers in her driveway, still in yoga pants, coffee in hand. I imagined her smile falter for once. I imagined Verletta answering her door in pearls and panic. That night, I didn't celebrate. I didn't even mention it when Clive texted later to say the paperwork had been received. I stayed home, sitting at my kitchen table, going over every page of the lawsuit like it was a map. Not because I didn't trust Clive, but because I needed to see it with my own eyes, line by line, signature by signature, the paper trail of what they thought I wouldn't catch. They didn't know I paid attention, that I always had. They underestimated the quiet one. The morning of the trial arrived with no thunder, no sign, just a clear sky and the kind of quiet that settles over a town right before it's forced to choose sides. I woke before the alarm, dressed in black slacks and a simple blouse, and pulled my hair back into a low knot. Practical, presentable, unshakable. Clive picked me up at 8. He didn't ask if I slept. We both knew the answer. The courtroom wasn't packed, But it wasn't empty either. A few neighbors. A couple of local reporters pretending not to eavesdrop. No cameras, just faces. Observing, judging, waiting. Marla sat directly across from me, arms crossed, jaw tight. She didn't speak, but her expression did. It said, "You shouldn't be here." Verletta sat beside her, hands clasped neatly in her lap like she was attending a recital. She wore a brooch I recognized, a silver hummingbird I'd made her in 8th grade. I hadn't seen her wear it since. Judge Skeldon entered, adjusted her robe, and nodded toward Clive. He stood, as calm as ever, and opened with what felt less like a legal statement and more like a reckoning. This trial is not about bitterness. It's about boundaries. Not about inheritance, but intention. The defendants presented themselves as custodians, yet never earned that trust. My client didn't seek to own anything. She simply refused to be erased again. He sat. No dramatics. No flair. Verletta's attorney rose next. He launched into a practiced monologue about family confusion, miscommunications, and clerical misunderstandings. He painted Verlette as a devoted mother, Marla as an overwhelmed daughter, and me as a woman who had let grief twist her perceptions. She was emotionally fragile, he said. Grief can cloud judgment, make us believe in versions of events that don't reflect reality. I didn't flinch. Then it was Dahlia's turn. She walked to the stand in navy slacks and a white blouse, simple and clean, her hair pulled back like mine. She looked directly at the judge, never once at Verlette or Marla. "I was Mr. Elric's in-home nurse for 8 months before he passed," she began. "Miss Delora was there every day. She paid for everything out of pocket. She kept a log. She coordinated appointments. She even fixed a broken toilet herself when the landlord didn't respond." Laughter stirred in the gallery. Quiet but real. Dahlia continued. "Marla came once, with a photographer. Verletta never showed up. Not for meals, not for doctor visits, not even in the final week." Marla's attorney objected, citing hearsay, but the judge allowed it. When Dahlia stepped down, Judge Skeldon turned to me. "Miss Delora, would you like to speak before we review final statements?" I stood. My voice didn't shake, not even once. "I never asked for any of this. Not the house, not the money, not the judgment." I paused. What I wanted was simple. I wanted to be remembered, not as a nuisance or a mistake, but as a daughter. I took a breath and looked at them, my mother and sister. "You claimed I was unstable, that I wasn't fit to manage the estate, or my own life. But I was the one who sat beside my father when he couldn't hold a spoon. I was the one who slept on a cot in his room. I was the one who stayed when his memory left him, and when it left me too." Verletta looked away. Marla stared at the floor. "I didn't stay because I had something to prove. I stayed because no one else did." The room was still when I finished. Judge Skeldon folded her hands. "The court finds the documents presented by Verlette Myra and Marla Genevieve to be invalid and intentionally misleading. Miss Delora remains the rightful executor of Howard Elric's estate." She paused, then added, "There will be no criminal charges, but let the public record reflect this misconduct clearly, for all who might be tempted to use grief as a cover for greed." The gavel sounded once. Final. Unmistakable. Outside, the air felt sharper. I walked down the courthouse steps, passing Marla and Verlette as they stood to the side. Neither of them spoke, but I did. "You wanted the world to see me as unstable," I said, pausing just long enough for the words to settle. "But now the world sees you." I didn't wait for their reactions. I didn't need them. That night, I didn't toast. I didn't post. I didn't tell anyone how it felt to be vindicated in front of strangers. I cleaned the kitchen. I made tea. I opened the last letter my father ever wrote me. After the kettle clicked off, I poured the hot water over a chamomile bag and sat at the kitchen table with the letter in my hands. The envelope was heavier than it should have been, like time had soaked into the paper, like silence had made it dense. To be opened when the noise stops. That's what he'd written on the front. Howard Elric's handwriting, all jagged edges and slanted loops. It was a familiar mess. I peeled it open slowly, careful not to rip it, and unfolded the single page inside. No date, no salutation, just words, raw, rambling, honest. "I know by now you've read everything else," it began. "The will, the journal, probably even the receipts. You always kept the pieces others didn't think mattered." I paused, thumb pressed against the edge of the paper, letting my eyes scan the next line before I could decide how I felt. "I'm sorry I remembered everyone but you at the end. I forgot a lot of things, but I never forgot that you were there. Even when I didn't have the words for it. Especially then." The room was quiet. No clocks ticking, no traffic outside, just the sound of my own breathing filling the space. He continued, scribbled but legible. "I think about the mornings you made toast and left it on the edge of the tray, knowing I liked the crusts cut off but wouldn't say it out loud. I remember the time you rubbed my legs when they cramped up so bad I couldn't sleep. You didn't say anything, you just did it. You always just did it." I blinked hard, not from pain, not quite from sadness either, just release. "I failed you," the letter read. "Not in the loud ways people expect, not with shouting or abandonment, but in the quiet ways, the missed calls, the forgotten questions. I thought you didn't need much because you never asked. That was my mistake. I assumed silence meant strength." My hands loosened around the page. I could almost hear his voice, not the version from the video, or even from his last year, but the one from a long time ago. The one who used to hum when he built things in the garage. "It's not just that I didn't give you what you earned," he'd written near the end, the ink faint where his hand must have shaken. "It's that I didn't recognize what you were carrying. You were the one holding it all together. You always were." I folded the letter slowly and placed it in the box where I kept everything else. Journal, legal papers, receipts. I didn't seal it. Some things didn't need to be locked away anymore. I stood, stretched my back, and walked toward the living room where the easel still sat by the window. The canvas I'd been avoiding all week waited patiently, untouched, since the night I painted over it. This time, I didn't hesitate. I laid out my brushes, mixed the colors deliberately. Warm tones, soft lines, not abstract, not distant. This time, I painted a face. Mine. Not a self-portrait in the traditional sense. There was no exact likeness. But the shape of the shoulders, the light in the eyes, the stillness in the mouth. It was me. The version I'd spent years hiding behind everyone else's definition of who I was supposed to be. Not the forgotten daughter, not the problem, not the one who left, or was left. Just me. When it dried, I didn't frame it. I hung it just as it was, canvas exposed, rough around the edges. But it was whole, and it was mine. I stepped back and looked at the wall. The space that once held empty frames and cracked glass now held something full, something honest. "They erased me from the records," I whispered aloud, as if saying it one last time made it real. "But I've reclaimed something they never owned. It wasn't about being written into a will, or spoken of in polite conversation. It was about knowing, finally, that I had always belonged, even when no one handed me proof. And for once, I didn't need a frame to know I belonged in the picture." Before I let you go, I want to leave you with something from my heart. Not as a daughter, not as someone who fought for justice, but as a person who survived being overlooked. Sometimes the deepest scars are the ones no one else sees. Not because they're hidden, but because no one ever bothered to look. I spent years believing I needed permission to exist in the spaces I helped build, waiting for someone to say, "You belong here." But the truth is, you don't need a frame to prove your worth. Not in a family photo, not in a boardroom, not in life. If you've ever felt invisible, in your family, in your job, in your marriage, I want you to know that being quiet does not mean being weak. And being left out does not mean you are without value. You have every right to take up space, speak up, and reclaim your story, even if it means standing alone to do it. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever been the one who stayed quiet too long? Were you ever written out of your own family's story? Or maybe you've fought to be seen and won. Share your experience in the comments. Let's talk about it. Let's learn from one another. And hey, if this story moved you, if it touched something in your heart, drop a 1 in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from, city, state, country. Or if you didn't like this story, tell me why. I'm always open to listening. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button. If you want more stories like this, honest, emotional, and real, this is the place. We have so much more to talk about, and your voice matters here. Thanks for listening. I see you, and I'm glad you're here. Hi, I'm Vivian. My sister told me to just send a gift and skip her wedding, like I was a coworker, not her blood. No phone call, no explanation, just a link to a live stream and silence. But that message wasn't the beginning, it was the final proof. For years, I planned her events, paid her invoices, stood behind the camera, only to be cropped from every frame. Until I erased the guest list. Every single name. But how do you know when your own family is writing you out on purpose? And what happens when you finally write yourself out? The first time I read the message, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe she sent it to the wrong person. Maybe she was in a rush and meant to follow up with a call. But as I sat at my kitchen table, the screen still glowing in my hand, I knew better. My sister doesn't make mistakes like that. She makes statements. Just send your gift. No need to show up. That was it. No, hi Vivian. No, hope you're doing okay. No explanation. Just that one line. It felt less like an invitation and more like a closure. A door clicking shut from the other side. Outside, the light was starting to slip away behind the neighbor's oak trees. The kitchen smelled faintly of cinnamon. I had meant to bake something earlier, but never got around to it. Now, the half-measured sugar and untouched eggs felt ridiculous sitting on the counter, like props in a life I wasn't invited to finish. I didn't reply. Not right away. I stared at the message so long I started to memorize the pixels. Every word burned into my mind like a scar I wasn't expecting, but wasn't surprised by either. This wasn't new. This wasn't even shocking. It was just louder than before. The next morning, I found the envelope wedged awkwardly between a coupon booklet and some real estate flyer, cream-colored with rose gold lettering, the kind of thing brides pick out months in advance. I knew that because I helped her choose the samples, before I was uninvited. It was addressed to Marie Kalin. Wrong middle name. Wrong spelling of my last name. The zip code was from an apartment I left 5 years ago. I stood there at the mailbox, fingers frozen around the paper, while a neighbor's kid screamed from across the street about losing their soccer ball. Somehow that voice felt more personal than the envelope in my hand. Back inside, I sat on the couch and opened it. The design was beautiful, minimal, elegant, cold, just like her. The RSVP card was already filled in live stream, link to follow. They didn't even give me the choice to decline. I could have called her. I could have asked what happened, what I did. But what would I be asking for, really? An apology I already knew she didn't think I deserved? A seat at a table she had no intention of setting for me? So I said nothing. I didn't forward the message to Mom. I didn't vent in the group chat. I just let the silence wrap around me like a familiar coat. Not warm, but known. Later that day, I walked past the hall closet and caught sight of the shoebox where I kept old holiday cards. One of them was from Seraphine, Christmas, maybe 6 years ago. A generic Hallmark line, and her name scribbled with a heart. No personal note, no real feeling, just her usual signature performance of closeness. I left the box closed. Instead, I found myself scrolling back through moments I hadn't thought of in a long time. The time I covered her half of the rent during her first year out of college, and she posted a thank you to the universe. The time she borrowed my car and returned it empty on a Monday morning. The time I threw her a birthday brunch, and she tagged every guest in the photo except me. And still, I came back. I always did. Like the guest star who didn't realize she wasn't part of the cast anymore. By the time the sun had dipped fully behind the trees, I was sitting with a cold cup of tea and a note I'd written to myself months ago taped to the fridge. Do not make this about them. I laughed at it, no dry, humorless. What was I making it about then? Myself? Finally, I opened my planner. The flight info was still there. Austin to Santa Barbara, Friday morning. Hotel check-in, gift delivery window, all lined up with neat little checkboxes. I deleted each one. Then I opened the wedding file on my laptop. I had kept it for reference, the budget sheet, vendor contacts, sample designs. I didn't delete anything, but I moved it to a folder labeled Archived. Just seeing it disappear from my desktop gave me a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The last thing I did that night was slip the wedding invitation back into its envelope. I sealed it. Not to send, but to close. Because sometimes you don't need to yell to walk away. Sometimes you just stop showing up. I didn't cry that night. Instead, I sat on the edge of my bed, back straight, laptop open, and downloaded every document with my name on it and every file that used it without giving me credit. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Just awake in a way I hadn't been in a long time. 2 days later, I flew to Santa Barbara. The ticket was already paid for, and at that point, showing up felt less like support and more like reconnaissance. I landed in the late afternoon and headed straight to the hotel. The air smelled expensive lavender and glass and money. I didn't recognize my own reflection in the polished doors. I was underdressed, not by mistake, but because no one had told me the dress code had changed. At the check-in table, the event coordinator smiled politely, tapped on her iPad, and frowned. "You're not on the main list," she said. "Try the service entrance down the side hall. There's a second check-in there." I didn't argue. I just nodded and walked. That hallway smelled like floor polish and steamed vegetables. A staff member held the door for me with a quick, "You catering?" I stepped into the ballroom through a side curtain. Chandeliers sparkled overhead. Tables gleamed with gold trim. I scanned for mine. Table 18. Far corner, behind a structural column, beside the restroom. Close enough to hear the hand dryer. I found my name misspelled again, next to a stranger's. As I pulled my chair back, a woman sitting across the table looked up and said, "Oh, I thought you were with the staff." I smiled barely. "No, just a guest," I replied, though the word felt like a costume that didn't quite fit. I glanced across the room. My cousins, who hadn't seen Seraphine in years, sat near the dance floor. Seraphine's yoga instructor was at the head table. I counted 8 people closer to the mic than me, who'd never seen her cry or fail or manipulate. The program began. Toasts, laughter, clinking glasses. Seraphine stood, beaming in white silk. "I just want to thank everyone who made this day possible," she said. "Especially my sister. For the diamond bracelet, she knows which one." Every head turned. A ripple of "oh wow" and "must be nice" passed across the tables. I didn't raise my glass. I didn't move. She never asked me if she could mention it, never warned me she'd make it a spectacle. I felt like I'd been stripped and paraded in front of people who didn't know a thing about me, except that I apparently had money to burn. The slideshow followed, a montage of photos and designs. The color palette? Mine. The table cards? My handwriting? The logo projected behind the stage? I'd sketched it 6 months ago, but every credit read "Our amazing wedding team." Rowena, seated 2 chairs over, leaned in and whispered, "They're really running with your stuff, huh?" I didn't look at her. I just said, "They always do." The evening dragged. No one came to my table unless I waved them down. I declined dessert. The chocolate souffle looked lovely, but I couldn't taste anything past the ache in my throat. I kept my smile small, polite, something a guest might wear. When it was finally over, I pushed my chair back and walked out without saying goodbye. My coat was thin in the night air, but I kept my hands in my pockets. The valet stand was buzzing with conversation and flashing ticket stubs. I gave my name. They had no record. Do you remember who dropped off your car, miss? I had. Of course I had. I remembered handing my keys to a teenager in a maroon vest with too much cologne. But there was no proof now, no record, no entry, just like the guest list. I waited on the curb in silence while they searched. My phone buzzed with a notification from Seraphine's wedding app. Don't forget to tag your photos. I wanted to laugh. Instead, I stared at the screen until it dimmed and the reflection looking back at me faded. Back at the Airbnb, I slipped my shoes off without unbuckling them. Just kicked them into the corner, like I couldn't bear another second of pretending they fit the evening. My coat followed, then my necklace. Piece by piece, I shed what little armor I had brought with me. I poured a glass of wine I didn't want, left it on the counter. The room smelled faintly of lavender from the detergent the hosts used on their towels. It was the only thing soft about the night. I sat on the couch, letting the silence surround me. I didn't need noise. I had a highlight reel playing in my head, the sideways glances, the forced smiles, the way Seraphine hadn't looked at me once. Not even when she thanked me in front of everyone for the bracelet. Table 18. The bathroom door swinging open and closed beside us. The woman who asked if I was staff. The slideshow. The slideshow. A month ago, Seraphine had promised me I could say a few words on behalf of Dad. She said it so casually, I almost didn't take it seriously. But I'd written the speech. Rehearsed it in my head more times than I'd admit. When the MC called Rowena to the mic, I didn't move. Just kept chewing my salad that had long since gone soggy. Rowena smiled, fake sincere, and read some fluff about sisterhood and chosen family. It was polished, generic, and not mine. I wasn't overlooked. I was replaced. That distinction matters. After the lights dimmed and the slideshow started, I kept my expression still. I knew every color combination on the screen. I had spent hours agonizing over whether peach was too washed out for a late spring wedding. I knew the font for the menus, the layout of the name cards, even the loop timing on the final logo animation. And yet, every frame was tagged wedding team. No names, no credits, no trace of me. I leaned slightly toward Rowena, who was scrolling her phone under the table. I designed that logo, I said without looking at her. She glanced up. They're really running with your stuff, huh? They always do. I left before dessert was served. The valets had sorted out the car issue by then. Apparently, my name had been entered under service vendor Vivian Events. Not even a real company. Back at the Airbnb, I didn't change out of my dress right away. I sat down at the small desk by the window and opened my laptop. The battery was low, but it had enough juice to get through what I needed. I pulled up the shared Google Drive folder for the wedding. I had access to nearly everything. Seraphine never removed me as a collaborator, probably out of habit more than trust. I opened the logistics sheet first. My name was misspelled. Again. Maurice Calum. As if I were some distant uncle no one really knew. I clicked over to the design deck. No attribution. None of the pages even hinted I'd touched them. Then the final insult photos from that evening, already being uploaded. There was a group shot from the welcome line. My shoulder made it into the edge of the frame, cropped. Another from the balcony toast, everyone else holding a glass. My arm half visible behind a floral arrangement. That wasn't an accident. That was a language. It reminded me of a dinner years ago. Summer, backyard. I had just gotten promoted at work and brought the plaque to show Mom and Seraphine. Silly, I know, like I was back in grade school with a spelling bee ribbon. I barely got the words out before Mom asked Seraphine if she was still planning to go back to school for hair design. I had laughed then. I even made a joke about my ugly frame and how I should just leave it in the car next time. But I never brought anything to show after that. Now, staring at the screen, I understood the shape of their silence. It wasn't cold. It was precise, designed. So I started downloading. Every document I had submitted, every logo file, floral reference image, budget sheet, anything with my fingerprint on it, I copied into a folder titled, "In Case They Forget Again." Then I opened a blank note. I didn't write anything yet, just watched the cursor blink. I wasn't ready to burn the whole thing down. Not yet. But I had finally stopped pretending I wasn't already standing outside the fire. I didn't sleep much that night. Just kept the light on, laptop open, cursor blinking over an empty file name like it might eventually suggest one. By morning, I still hadn't typed anything, but the decision was made. Quietly, firmly. The hotel lobby was already humming by the time I arrived. People wheeled in carts of florals, stacks of centerpieces, crates labeled ceremony detail fragile. I moved through it like a shadow. I still had the flower samples and printed decor specs to drop offies. I was still doing my part. Habit is hard to kill, even when dignity's on the line. I found Seraphine at the far end of the ballroom, camera crew circling her like she was on the cover of a magazine shoot. She didn't see me. Or maybe she did and chose not to. I hovered near the assistant coordinator and handed off the samples. Before I could step back, the photographer looked up and asked, "Are you with media or event staff?" I smiled faintly. "Neither." He nodded, then turned away. The bridal party lined up for a group shot near the archway. They laughed. Someone adjusted Seraphine's veil. I waited for anyone to say, "Get Vivian in one," but no one did. I stepped back, into the corner, out of frame, out of expectation. Later, while refilling water at the back table, I glanced at the TikTok team's laptop. A preview reel was playing clips of the bride laughing, hugging relatives, clinking glasses with vendors. I saw myself once, mid-step, obscured by a floral column. The editor pointed at the frame and said, "Well, crop that for symmetry." I didn't say a word, but I heard the thought echo, as familiar as it was final. They've been cropping me for years, just never with software. At lunch, I overheard Seraphine and Rowena finalizing the seating layout. My name didn't come up. Neither of them looked my way. I sat down beside a cooler and sipped a flat bottle of Sprite like it was something important to do. Eventually, I approached Rowena while she was sorting name tags. "Am I still at table 18? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. She blinked, surprised it asked. "I think so." "I'm not sure. Actually, Seraphine wanted to keep things fluid." "Right." "Fluid," I said. "That's one way to avoid committing to anything." She gave a tight laugh and busied her hands. It wasn't guilt, it was discomfort. Later, we found ourselves in the same hallway while waiting for Seraphine to wrap a call. The buzz of preparations softened. Just enough space for truth to slip in. Rowena cleared her throat. She hesitated. She said if you were in too many of the main shots, you'd pull focus. I didn't react. Not right away. I just let the words hang between us like wet clothes too heavy to move. Focus. That was the word she chose. Not disrupt, not distract. Pull focus. As if my mere presence bent the light away from her. "And what did you say?" I asked, voice level. Rowena looked down. I didn't know what to say. Of course she didn't. That was the role she'd signed up for: neutral ground. Comfortable silence. Convenient alliance. I didn't speak again. Just walked back to the guest prep area, retrieved my laptop bag, and left. Back at the Airbnb, I didn't cry. That part of me felt long gone. Instead, I spread out my documents on the kitchen table. Invoices, logo drafts, table layout suggestions, vendor referrals. One by one, I ran them through a watermarking app. My name, my work, my proof. I created a backup folder, labeling it cleanly, in case they forget again. I didn't call it revenge. I called it insurance. Then I opened the digital guest list, just hovered over it. Nothing more. But that night, for the first time, I stopped asking myself what I had done to deserve being left out, and started asking what they had done to earn my presence in the first place. By the time I woke up the next morning, I knew better than to expect repair. I checked my phone, not for apologies. Those were a luxury long extinct in my family, but out of habit. A forwarded message sat unread from a college friend I hadn't spoken to in over a year. The subject line read, "You're in this, right?" It was a link to a feature on a popular wedding blog. A full spread about Seraphine's DIY dream wedding, filled with pastel tones and polished phrases. She was quoted saying, "I planned every detail myself. I didn't want to burden anyone. I wanted this to reflect my vision entirely." My name was nowhere in the piece. No mention of the designs, the sourcing, the weeks I spent compiling vendor lists she never thanked me for. I didn't blink. I didn't reread it. I downloaded the article as a PDF and filed it away. Not for keepsake, just to have it saved in case anyone tried to gaslight me later. That was my reality now. Archiving proof of the erasure. Later that morning, I got dressed and walked to the venue. I held the gift bag in one hand, plain white with a simple satin ribbon. Inside was the pendant I'd commissioned, a custom redesign of Nena's brochure grandmother. I'd paid extra to have it engraved, discreetly, with a line only Seraphine would recognize. I didn't include a card. At the check-in table, the assistant coordinator barely looked up. "You can leave it here," she mumbled, motioning toward a cluster of gifts stacked in no order, no care. I placed it down and turned to leave. Nobody stopped me. No one offered a thank you. I was invisible again, but this time I let it be intentional. I didn't return to my Airbnb right away. Instead, I walked down to the garden patio near the ballroom entrance, where my mother sat alone with a cup of coffee, scrolling her phone like nothing in the world could touch her. I sat across from her. She looked up, blinked, and offered a smile like a cashier trained to say, "Have a nice day, no matter what." "You look tired," she said. "I am," I replied. I read the article. She knew what I meant. She didn't deny it. She just sighed and said, "Sweetheart, Seraphine has always been more fragile than you. You know that. She needs this, that line, that tired line, the one that's been my mother's fallback for as long as I've had memories." "When exactly do I get to need something?" I asked, not raising my voice. "When do I get to matter without pretending I don't?" She didn't answer, just took a slow sip of her drink and looked past me, toward the event tent being set up with delicate string lights and rented chairs. That was our pattern, she dismissed. I digested. But this time, I didn't sit there and let the moment dissolve. I stood up. "You've chosen her over me every time, and I let you. But don't be surprised when I stop showing up to be left out." Before she could formulate a response, I walked off. Inside the venue hallway, I caught Rowena near the programs table. She looked startled to see me, probably still reeling from the passive-aggressive brunch she had to moderate earlier. I didn't wait for pleasantries. "If my name disappears again," I said, "I'll take back everything attached to it." Her eyes widened. "Vivian, come on! You wouldn't ruin her wedding over this ego stuff." I smiled without warmth. I wouldn't ruin anything. I just stopped pretending I wasn't already erased. She didn't have a comeback. Just shifted uncomfortably and nodded like someone unsure if they were speaking to a friend or a threat. Back at the Airbnb, I powered up my laptop and opened every folder, reviewed every contract, checked every document that carried my name watermarked, dated, backed up. Then I opened the master guest list, the one Seraphine never thought to restrict access to. I didn't touch it, not yet. I simply changed one small thing, my permission level. Owner. By the time they realized I meant every word, I was long gone. Gone from the hotel. Gone from the role they kept shoving me into. I had already logged into the back-end system, and this time, I wasn't cleaning up anyone else's mess. I didn't wait for the evening's charade to begin. No sunset, no violins, no fake smiles under candlelight. I arrived while the afternoon light still slanted through the tall windows, painting the carpet in gold and shadow. The ballroom buzzed with frantic activity, staff in black uniforms wheeled carts of champagne flutes. Florists were still fiddling with blooms. Someone barked directions about the lighting rig. I kept my head steady, my eyes clear. I wore a simple navy wrap dress, chosen not for glamour, but for movement, efficiency. I could slip into any corner, pass through any door unnoticed, and apparently I did. A young man in a black vest spotted me from across the room. He didn't really look at me, just saw a woman in a plain dress and made an assumption. "Could you move that tray to the other side?" I stared at him for a breath. And then I moved it. Not out of obedience, not even out of sarcasm, but because there's something oddly liberating about letting people mislabel you. Again. Still, they only see what they think you are, and they never see you when they've already decided you're no one. I made my way to the back of the ballroom where the tech table sat, where the montage for the wedding reception was queued up and ready to run. That montage had been a labor of love. I'd snuck in a video. Short, simple. Just a few kind words from me, in case no one remembered to offer me the mic. A gentle nod to our father. No spotlight, just something meaningful. But when I checked the screen, it was gone. I felt it before I confirmed it. That slow, rising cold in your chest when something important is missing, and you already know who took it. I pulled out my phone and opened the shared folder from the planning drive. I scrolled. Nothing. No trace of the video file, not even in the trash. Then I checked the version history. Last accessed by Rowena. There it was. The casual cruelty of a perfectly composed digital paper trail. A message from her in the project chat. We had to clean things up for flow. Flow. That shiny word they use when they're too cowardly to say you don't belong. I closed the app. Walked calmly out to the bar area just beyond the reception entrance. There she was, Rowena in full command mode, flipping through her clipboard, chatting with the DJ about cue points and entrances, eyes gleaming with perfectionist pride. I didn't wait. So now I'm too messy to include? I said. She blinked. What? My video. You deleted it. She stiffened slightly, tried to keep her voice breezy. It's not personal, Vivian. It's about cohesion. No, I said evenly. It's about control. You don't get to rewrite this without consequences. If cohesion means cutting people out, don't be shocked when the thread you trimmed turns out to be holding everything together. She looked around for backup. There was none. I left her standing there. Back at the Airbnb, I peeled off the dress and washed the cold residue of the day from my face. I sat at the little wooden desk I'd used all week, the one overlooking the alley behind the building. The laptop booted up like it always did. The guest list spreadsheet popped up first, like a ghost still waiting for me to serve it. I didn't touch it, not yet. Instead, I opened everything else, every planning file, every vendor contract, every signed agreement I had coordinated, scanned receipts, permits, schedules. I created a new folder titled, For When Enough is Enough. I backed it all up, encrypted it, then copied it again to an external drive. They wanted to treat me like an extra chair in an overbooked venue? Fine, but I still held the key to every single exit. Then I opened my email client and typed one sentence. I warned you not to erase me. Now I'll show you what it feels like. I scheduled it for 7:00 right before the first bridal hair appointment and just before the ceremony's final call. I stood up, crossed the room, and opened the closet. No dress, just a pair of soft jeans, a clean blouse, comfortable walking shoes, neutral tones, clothes not for celebration but for liberation. I laid them out neatly, like armor. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and let the breath leave me all the way out. No more rehearsals, no more restraint. They'd removed me from the story. But they forgot. I was the one holding the pen. I woke up before the sun, before traffic, before even the pigeons outside the Airbnb window began their morning squabble. The kind of silence that fills a room with clarity before the day starts demanding things from you. I didn't rush for my phone. I let the stillness linger, walked barefoot to the kitchen, brewed coffee I wouldn't drink, and opened the curtains as if I owned the city. Then I opened the planner email. Subject line, Final VIP Access Schedule Wedding Day. I blinked, scrolled again. My name wasn't there. No call time, no badge, no entry credential, nothing. I opened the group chat from the rehearsal team. The itinerary was pinned at the top. Everyone had a designated role driver pickups, timing blocks, point persons. Everyone had a handler. Except me. Even the rideshare schedule had been updated. New cars, new passengers. I wasn't on any list. No one had texted. No one had asked where I'd be. It was like I had never existed. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I let out a breathless laugh, one of those hollow, tired ones. The kind of laugh you let slip when something finally confirms what you already knew, but weren't ready to admit. Still, I got dressed. Jeans, a soft, loose blouse. Nothing close to festive. Just enough to pass through the city unnoticed. I slipped a small gift bag into my hand, the only piece I hadn't delivered early. Inside, Nana's brooch, redesigned into a necklace. One of a kind, meaningful, until now. I considered keeping it, just walking away with the last piece of what I gave, but a part of me knew she wouldn't notice, or care. Not unless someone was watching. At the venue, I walked past the flower arch I had designed. The bridal coordinator barely glanced at me. "Vendor check-in?" she asked absently. I set the gift bag down. "I'll be watching from the room," I said. She didn't ask my name. Just nodded, already turning back to her clipboard. Just another worker bee. That moment crystallized something. This wasn't about revenge. Not yet. It was about refusing to be erased quietly. Not anymore. Back at the Airbnb, I opened my laptop. The live stream had started, buffering slowly. I didn't plan to watch the whole thing, just long enough to confirm the time. And then I saw her. Seraphine, framed perfectly beneath the floral lattice I had recommended 6 months ago, her gown glittering like a bridal commercial. She lifted something delicately in her Honda pendant. The pendant. My pendant. The redesign I had spent 3 weeks perfecting. She smiled at the camera. "A gift from my future mother-in-law," she said sweetly. So thoughtful. Below her name, the stream overlay read, "Gift from the Adler family." I didn't flinch, didn't gasp. Just quietly closed the tab. It wasn't about the gift. It was that she knew. She knew it wasn't theirs to give. This wasn't a mistake. This was revision. A calculated exclusion. I opened the planning folder again. Everything was still there, still unlocked. Like a manual for my own disappearance. No mention of me on the VIP list. No credits. No slide acknowledging my help. The digital seating chart archived by the planning team included third cousins I'd never met, her college roommate's new boyfriend, and the mailman who apparently loaned his truck for decor transport. Everyone but me. This wasn't forgetfulness. This was design. I opened the hidden folder I'd created 2 days earlier. I'd known this was coming, I just didn't know how far she'd go. Inside, PDFs of every signed vendor agreement, logo drafts, email threads, budget notes, invoices with my name, every submission watermarked, quiet receipts of my presence. I started drafting an email, clean, professional, just enough to remind them I held the blueprint. Subject, timeline breach, intellectual removal, notice pending. Attachments, logo.psd, layout, final.pdf, vendor, referrals, JXLSX. But I didn't send it. Instead, I opened the master guest list, the real one, the one they thought no one else had access to, and I started clicking. One by one, I erased them. Not the family, not Seraphine. I didn't touch her name. I removed the fringe, the people who smiled politely and whispered privately, the influencers, the yoga buddies, the co-workers who showed up for the wine, not the vows, the relatives who had called me jealous for stepping back. Click, click, gone, not loudly, just removed. She wanted an audience more than she wanted me? Fine. Now she'd have neither. I didn't leave to win. I left to stop losing pieces of myself. The sun hadn't even cracked the edge of the sea when I stepped out onto the quiet street. There was something sacred about being up before the world had a chance to speak. I walked toward the coast without a plan, hands in my jacket pockets, heart beating steady, not fast, not calm, just sure. Tucked inside the left pocket was an envelope, sealed the night before. Inside, a printed copy of every agreement I'd signed, every email confirming services under my name. I'd printed them in silence, hole-punched, and labeled them like I used to do in high school debate prep. At the back of the folder was a simple typed note. Funding rescinded due to erasure of contributor. See attached. I didn't feel angry, not anymore. I felt ready. On the terrace near the ballroom, I saw her, Aunt Odile. She was sipping her tea alone, cross-legged like she always sat, even when chairs weren't made for it. I hadn't seen her since she arrived, and somehow she didn't look surprised to see me. She nodded toward the seat beside her. I sat down. "They can pretend all they want," she said gently, without looking at me. "But I see you. You built this." I didn't answer. I couldn't. She reached into her coat pocket and pressed something into my palm. It was an old photo and Dad, standing at the edge of his garden. I couldn't have been more than 12. On the back, in his faded script, "Let them talk. You just keep growing." I swallowed the ache, folded the photo into my wallet without a word. Back in the room, I didn't hesitate. I opened the laptop, logged into the admin dashboard of the event system, and pulled up the master guest list. Every table, every name, every assigned code and dietary note. I selected all. Clicked remove. Confirmed. Then I drafted the auto message. "Due to breach of terms, guest access has been revoked. Please contact your event lead for clarification." I clicked activate. It pulsed once, then went still. Downstairs, the ripple began within minutes. Sabine, the planner, was the first to notice. I had left her the envelope with the documents at the registration table. I watched from the parking lot across the street as she opened it, brows knitting slowly, then fully furrowed. She looked around, lips pressed tight, then pulled out her phone. Inside the ballroom, things fell apart in quiet bursts. iPads flashed error codes. Table checklists disappeared. Guest names blinked out like lights in a storm. By the time Seraphine realized something was wrong, she was halfway through lipstick application, a camera crew waiting for their cue. I imagined her confusion, her voice rising. "What do you mean the list is gone?" I imagined her scanning the room, searching for someone to fix it, to blame. She wouldn't find me, because I wasn't there. By then, I had already checked out. Bags packed, keys returned. I was in the back of a car heading to Santa Ynez, an old vineyard inn I'd stayed at once years ago. No one knew the address. No one asked. I didn't check my phone. I didn't watch the ceremony unravel. But I knew in the weight of my breath, in the exhale that didn't catch halfway through my chest, in the stillness of my spine as I leaned back against the car seat. They built it on silence, and I finally made silence loud enough to tear it down. 2 days later, the morning light in Santa Ynez came in soft through the linen curtains. It touched everything gently, my notebook on the table, the ceramic cup of half-drunk tea, the leather strap of my watch resting in the shape of my wrist. I didn't rush to check my phone. When I finally did, it lit up with a stream of missed calls. Seraphine, Rowena, an unknown number, with a Los Angeles area code. I let them sit there. Instead, I walked into town and found a bakery tucked between a wine shop and an antique bookstore. I ordered something I didn't need and sat by the window, pen in hand, writing nothing in particular. Just lines that didn't need to become anything more than what they were, thoughts that belonged to me. Around mid-morning, I got a message forwarded from an old co-worker. A screenshot. Seraphine had posted on Instagram. The caption read, "Sometimes people walk away when you need them most. But love wins." The comments were turned off. No wedding photos were shared. Just a blurry image of her bouquet and the back of someone's head, maybe the planner, maybe a stand-in. The wedding blogs ran short headlines. Unforeseen vendor issues. Disrupt wedding of influencer Seraphine Adler. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't screenshot it. I didn't send it to anyone. I just sipped my coffee and turned the page in my notebook. Around noon, my phone buzzed again. This time, I answered. "Vivian!" Odile's voice came softly. "Do you feel lighter?" I thought about it. About the silence that had followed the storm. About the stillness in my body. About the absence of the ache I had carried for years and mistaken for love. "I feel clean," I said. She paused, then offered only this. That's what the truth does. It doesn't shout. It clears. I stayed on the line for another few seconds, hearing her breathe on the other end like a tether that didn't bind, only steadied. That afternoon, I finally opened the envelope she had given me days before. Inside was the photo. Me and Dad, standing in his backyard garden, his arm draped around my shoulder, like I was the only thing that had ever grown straight in that place. On the back, his handwriting read, "You see more than anyone. One day, they'll need you to remind them what was real." I found a frame in the lobby gift shop. Nothing fancy, but solid wood. Real. I didn't frame it to dwell in the wound. I framed it because sometimes, remembering is not about staying in the pain, it's about reclaiming the version of you that never needed anyone's permission to exist. Back in the room, I logged out of the shared drive. I composed a short email to Sabine, the planner. "Please remove my credentials and archive my contributions. I'm stepping away permanently." No signature, no flourish. Then I opened a blank canvas in my design software. Not for a logo, not for anyone else's wedding. Just a brand concept. Clean lines, muted tones. Something for a business idea that had been sitting in the back of my head for years, but never had space to breathe. A business that had nothing to do with being the helpful sister, the fixer, the fallback. I didn't need a launch party. I didn't need applause. I needed to know that this chapter of my life closed not with a scream, but with a decision. Because some endings don't come with closure. Some endings come with a clean line drawn in your own hand. And walking away isn't always about anger. Sometimes it's just about choosing to protect what's left of you.